I'm speaking in good faith with Chris Bennett, with Julie Bennett. Chris is a pastor, a writer, and producer originally from Dallas, Texas. Julie is a writer, producer, speaker, and two-time cancer survivor from Edmond, Oklahoma. Chris and Julie, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you, Steve. So happy to be with you.
Yeah,
Honored.
And it looks like you're speaking to me from your home in California.
Yes, sir. We are sitting here with a really ugly view of the ocean. No, suffering for the Lord.
I don't know if that exists, but
no.
Yeah, we're in Malibu, California. We moved to the LA area about 6 years ago, but Malibu about 2 years ago for the church that I'm pastoring here.
Wonderful. Their family made this decision to leave Oklahoma and move to Los Angeles, where they together run their own production company, Welcome Home Entertainment. Chris and Julie have 4 kids, Bo, Nate, Brooks, and Joy. I like that we mention them by name, partly, I don't know, it tells us something about them and you, but also they show up in your book.
Yeah.
Because it's family. Chris serves as lead pastor of Vintage Church in Malibu, California, and they're in the process of developing a documentary series where they explore the power and diversity of family through the stories of those who have experienced it. Your book that we're talking about today came out just in March, so this is a recent publication in 2024. Why did you feel like you needed to write it, and who did you think your audience was going to be? Who was it written for?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. We heard this quote recently by another author that said, great stories happen to those who can tell them. And I think all of us have we all have a story. We all have a story that's being written, and all of us have chapters of our story that we never thought would be in there. And, I think we've found that, in an Instagram curated, filtered world, we love to post our ultimate highlights, and those aren't as relatable as the fails and the messes of life. And so we really wrote this book to just share our story, which is filled with a lot of pain, a lot of disappointment, a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. But, we found that as connected as this generation is through social media and technology and beautiful things like this, that we can be on the other side of the country and have these conversations, it's being called the loneliest generation. And right as even we were writing this book, the U.S. Surgeon General put out this 85-page document, and the title was Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And so there's this false sense of connection when what people really need is to find a place where they can belong. And even though that word gets thrown around a lot, the essence of belonging is, where can I bring my whole self and not be judged because of it? Where can I be loved? Where can I be accepted and feel like I've got a place of belonging? And so that's really why we wrote this book, is although we have our own family and 4 kids, as you mentioned, that's not everybody's story. And for many people, their family is their found family or their chosen family. But because of pain and wounding around something that was meant to be family, people tend to isolate. And so we wrote this to help, the tagline is the relentless pursuit of building belonging. And so we help people kind of identify and overcome the barriers that keep them from experiencing family.
And you make this really clear in the book that sometimes if we're only presenting, that is, I think you quote Thomas Merton actually, about whether we present something we create or whether we actually share authentically from ourselves is the difference in being able to actually feel that we belong or not.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, have you? Yeah. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying too that I think the one thing, I think we wrote it in chapter 4, it was called Excuse the Mess. And that is one of the barriers, is we are, which lends itself to isolation, is it's like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to leave my arm and leg behind because I don't know if anybody was going to want to see that, and bringing our whole self sounds like a really great thing. It's so difficult to do in the world we live in. Again, especially because we're so connected and everything is seen and it's curated. And the one thing we all can relate to is that we've all been a mess, felt like a mess. We know people are a mess. And there's something that when we can bring our whole selves, it's like human plus human equals human problems. That's real, because perfection doesn't exist. But how do we create spaces for people to do that? So, yeah.
And because you have shared so vulnerably in the book, I'm curious, a lot of people have the experience of they get brave enough to share and they're waiting for the repercussions or the blowback. Yeah. And yet so often it's not there. People
Yeah.
appreciate it so much. Is that your experience, or have you had some of both?
Yeah, I think that I personally have had some of both. I think vulnerability is, they say vulnerability breeds vulnerability, and we need that in the world. But sometimes vulnerability can come. I've experienced it personally where my vulnerability in past seasons of my life where I'm needing something so badly internally that I am vulnerable because I'm insecure. I'm vulnerable because I need a friend. I'm vulnerable versus vulnerability to bring who I really am. And there's a difference. Vulnerability is risky. It takes risk. And I think it's an author and speaker, Brene Brown, says something like, it's like a vulnerability hangover. She kind of
Yeah.
talks about that. And it's true. Sometimes I'm like, we walk away going, oh gosh, I'm sure they're judging me. I'm not sure. I probably am definitely not going to fit in now. Going, if my vulnerability is coming out of a place of, I'm wanting to realize that other people have mess too, kind of what I was talking about earlier. I bet they can relate to where I am. I'm coming to bring just who God has created me to be in this setting. That's different than I need something from you. And again, that comes from doing the work, of knowing our true identity. So,
And Steve, know what I've found, and is that because we all have pain, to belabor the point, we all have parts of our story that not everybody needs to know everything. But to me, when you've been wounded and you're being vulnerable, but you're still broken, you're bleeding, it's actually not helpful. You need to go through your own process. And so I think sometimes people, especially in the social media context where people are just vomiting their stuff out there and they're calling it vulnerability, but it's not actually helpful. And I've seen so many people that they're living from their wounding and they're just attracting wounded people to lick their wounds with them. And so I think we're going for, there's no perfection, but let's go for health, and let's work through the stuff that we need to work through so that we can present the parts of us that are, not clean, not perfect, but that's where people can actually get helped.
And I think there's something really useful that you put God in the mix here.
Yeah.
I mean, that just seems like a basic ingredient of what you're talking about. And from the outset, were you looking to speak to people from, well, you were looking to speak from a faith perspective. I feel that in the book.
mm-hmm.
I would say that what we know is humanity, whether you are a, person of faith or not, we were designed, we believe, by a creator for belonging. We were actually created for one another. I mean, the first thing God said in creation that wasn't good was man to be alone. God is we believe, there's the triune part of God. It's communal. And so I think in our DNA, God built us like Legos, where it's like we do better when we're connected to one another. Yeah, we have our individual part to play, but the beauty is displayed in the togetherness. So I think that's where, for us, our faith has been the key component of how we've been able to go through forgiveness and healing and reconciliation. So we speak from that vantage point, but also recognizing that whether you're a person of faith or not, in one sense, we're all kind of looking for the same thing, which is, can I be loved? Can I be accepted? Can I find a sense of family?
Yeah, because perfection is not the secret sauce to building family. It's our humanity, it's vulnerability, it's rallying around those things that we can all relate to.
Your chapter in humility, if I can quote the two of you to yourselves, from page 103, you said something that I had to put a sticky note in. It said, well, what Chris and I have learned, especially since we married so young, is that you go through a lot more change when you stick around in relationships. So we should expect it not as a byproduct of relationships, but as one of the reasons to stay in them. We need other people to help us grow. And no one grows faster than a person willing to listen. That sticking around for each other, even when it's like, oh boy. I mean, I've been married going on 36 years. We have 4 kids, 2
Congrats.
married.
That's amazing.
Third grandchild on the way. And there are those moments where you look at each other and you take a deep breath, like, oh, we just turned a corner and now I see the rapids ahead and we're going to have to live through this.
Yeah.
So here you call it fighting for family. So you could say, well, we're all family. We came together. We have these kids. We're family. We just are. But what is the fighting part? What is it that you actively have to do to create that belonging and to help each other and learn from each other?
Wow. I mean, I think the start to your point, I mean, again, I know not everyone is married that's listening to this, but when we made a covenant, we set our I do's, and I had mine handwritten on a scrap paper. I had it framed. I think our 10-year anniversary, we've been married 23 years. But it's easy to say in a beautiful wedding ceremony, but every one of those things gets tested by life. And I think for us, watching how, we live in a culture that knows how to fight with their family. We live in a cancel culture where people so quickly are willing to walk away and lose their family over their preferences. And we saw it with politics. We saw it during COVID. I mean, I have friends who literally lost relationship with their parents over vaccine positions, and you're going, wow, the margin for error seems so small now in relationships. And obviously there's unhealthy, toxic relationships. We're not advocating to stay in abusive, toxic relationships, but we are saying it is inevitable that the closer you get with somebody, the more likely there is to be pain and wounding. And there's nothing that will refine you more or reveal your brokenness more than a person up close and personal. So I think that's where we just said, we've been through so much. Yeah. Forgiveness has been, the gateway to any relationship is the continual willingness to forgive and not keep a record of wrongs. That's the only way we have the marriage we have today. And we still hurt each other and we still disappoint each other, but we've chosen to walk in radical forgiveness.
Yeah. I think it's in the humility chapter, but a couple things that they're really simple, that we try to live by as a family, especially in those moments where everything is clashing like giant cymbals. And maybe it's not a literal, like I'm leaving the family. It's like, I'm walking out. I can't have this conversation, whatever it is. Or I want to put up walls as I don't know everything and I can learn from you. They're very simple, but when they bring us back to humility, they bring us back to a place of like, how can we regroup? And in the mess chapter, there's some things where we say like, I'm going to allow myself to be complicated. I'm going to allow myself to be a mess. I'm going to let other people be complicated. And as we do that, we realize, man, we can come together. And maybe we can talk about it later, but at the table, talking about when Jesus was around the table and what he created was such a sense of belonging. It's how he went about it.
Yeah.
Would you comment on, you hinted at one of them here, what you call the 3 commitment?
Yes. The first one, oh gosh, what is it? Hold on.
I've got him here.
What's the first one?
Admit that I can't control everything.
Thank you. Yes. We'll start there. Yeah. The first one is I can't control everything. I will allow myself to be messy around others and I will let others be complicated. And the first one's so important because, I'll speak more for myself, but I've really learned that perfection and control don't create belonging and relationship and family like I think it does. That comes from my traumatic experiences, my pain. I grew up in an amazing Christian home, but I also had sexual abuse in my background. We had betrayal in our marriage. I had an affair back 20 years ago, early in our marriage. And you look at these major traumatic moments in life. And so when I'm going into family that God has completely restored, when God restores something, he makes it better than it was before. And although we know that's not everyone's story where they're at right now, there's something that when we come to the mess, like, okay, I can't control everything. That's something I'm telling myself going, what I have learned, even though I have pain that I am working to continually be whole and healed in, that's a form of self-protection. And so when I just remind myself control does not bring about what I'm really longing for, and then, okay, I can come to the table with somebody, literally or figuratively, and go, okay, they may have some pains too. So it just does something about how we see each other, because most of the times when I'm judging somebody else, it's just because I'm judging myself. And so when I can learn to love those really messy parts of me, then I'm able to look at people in the context of my immediate family, as a mom, as a friend, and go, man, I wonder, maybe they're judging something in themselves right now. How can I take a step back and let that person be complicated, which may allow a conversation we need to have that brings unity and friendship.
And you have both mentioned now an understanding that lots of people do not have the traditional
Right.
family that has been proclaimed as the traditional family since at least the 50s.
Mhm.
And in my own denomination, they recently said the majority of the adults over 50% are single.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so suddenly it's like, this is not the group we're trying to include around the fringes. This is now at least 50%, maybe the majority. So
Yeah.
fighting for family, fighting for belonging in a situation
Good question.
like that, what do you advise, or what have you thought about or experienced with people you work with?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've tried to be really aware, even, pastoring a church. And, sometimes we can speak a language that we think relates to everybody and realize, oh, there's a lot of people that doesn't relate to. And just sometimes it's just acknowledging who's in the room or who's around us, that our story isn't everybody's story, but we're all looking for the same thing. And so I remember during COVID, we had a few of our single friends over that were in their 20s and 30s. And the whole purpose of the conversation was we want to have a meal together and we want to learn about family from you guys, and your experience is different. So what does family look like for you? How have you kind of built a sense of family as a single? And one of our friends said something that we mentioned in the book, and it's just stayed with us. But she said, belonging is not just something that you find, it's something that you bring. And we were like, hang on, can you rewind and say it again? And she just made the point that, sometimes we're waiting we love to be invited in. That's the best when we get invited in. But what happens when you don't? But you start with this place of identity of, okay, I believe I am worth, I have worth and I have value, that I belong. But if I don't believe I belong, guess what? Everywhere I go, I'm going to be waiting to be rejected and left out. But a lot of that starts as a child. We didn't get picked on the kickball team in third grade. And those things create these subtle messages, right? So to the point of that, we had a lady in our church that, we talk big about family, and our church feels very welcoming and all the things. We had a lady in her 40s that was single that set up a coffee meeting with me. And she said, hey, I've been coming to the church for a while. And so several weeks in a row, she goes, I would just stand in the middle of the room and see if anybody would talk to me. And I watched everybody talking, and no one said a word to me. And she goes, so I wanted to get angry and I wanted to leave. And she goes, but I went and I prayed and I said, God, what should I do? He said, I want you to go back and I want you to find every person that's standing by themselves. And I want you to invite them in. I want you to create belonging for them. And so I just thought that was a really key practical thing that we can do. And that takes risk, because anytime we step out, we do a whole chapter on risk. We're risking, hey, this might not work out, or I could get rejected, or this thing could fail miserably. But we just believe family's always worth the risk.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, beautiful to keep in mind. And how interesting that if you had asked all the people around that woman, how did you feel today? And did you feel a sense of belonging? They all could have said yes, except for her.
Yep.
But she was the one, but no one, at least at that particular event, noted.
Well, yeah, there was this whole study done by, I think it was a lady from BYU. And the essence was, she was talking about belonging. And all the research was saying, being around people doesn't equal belonging. You can be surrounded by people and be lonely on the inside. And I did a funeral 2 weeks ago from a guy in our church, married, had a son, 3 grandkids. This man served on our setup team every week. I love this man deeply. He battled with depression. I was with him on Good Friday, checking on him, how he's doing. And he was like, I've been really low. And he said, I just don't want to be a burden. And I remember grabbing his shoulders, leaning in. I said, listen, you are not a burden. And he took his life a week and a half later. And I'm going on the outside, well, hang on, you have family, you have community, all these things. But sometimes that barrier is believing we are a burden. And if I actually bring my whole self, I'm not going to be loved. And it's such a lie, and we've got to help create spaces for people that they cannot feel so alone, or that they have to have it all together. Yeah.
That's good.
You talk also of any one of these chapters, we could take an hour on.
Yeah.
But you spend some time with, here's a quote, if you feel like God is nudging you to do something, say yes before you know how. And I'm tying that in with a question I have here about how did your faith in God influence your being okay with taking risks? So that idea of feeling a nudge, first perceiving that, and then is that something you were always able to do, or how did you learn to sort of step out in faith when you feel that?
Yeah.
I mean, give me a go first.
I'll tag on the back.
Julie is by personality more of a risk taker than me. So
Uh-huh.
I think sometimes we think risk means I need to go, skydiving or something. To me, us risk is.
I do love to skydive. Okay.
I think I heard somebody say this years ago. Faith is spelled risk, and I think sometimes risk is just taking that one little step of faith towards something that you feel like God may be leading you to do. We tell people all the time, we moved to LA without a home, without a job, without income, moved 20 times while she's battling cancer. All these crazy parts of our story, and we had people saying, "Well, I need to do something crazy." We're like, no.
Yeah.
It's not a comparison.
That's right.
Like risk for you is going to look different than risk for us. But I'll tell this super quick story because we took this huge risk to move to LA. And a month after we move out here, I get a text from a guy that I did not know at the time, hardly at all. He's become a good friend since. But he basically goes, "Hey, I tracked down your number and I woke up at 4 a.m. and God gave me a prayer to pray for your family." And he said, "I felt like God said to me that it's your faith that led you to LA, but it's your trust that's going to keep you there." And he said, because trust gets at the deepest condition of the human heart. And I remember reading that thinking, oh, that's cute. And I put it in my notes section of my phone. And then about a month later, she gets cancer. We go on this crazy journey. But I'm bringing it all back to say, faith at times when you take that step is you feel like a crazy person. But I found that God will give us just enough to say yes. And then we almost have to wait for the next part and then the next part. And then we look back months, years later, we go, oh, wow, we've come so much further than we realized.
I mean, if we wait for every duck to be in a row, we learned really early in marriage, and we will never move and step forward and be like, well, it can't be God because everything is not perfect. And God's like, have I said go? Have I said yes? And of course, that's the framework that we're operating in. And so when we went from pastoring a church in Oklahoma for a decade, leaving everything, which is a really long story why we came to LA, but with so many confirmations from God, and then everything falls apart. I mean, our home that was sold didn't sell, and we found ourselves with 8 suitcases, 4 children in LA, staying with the family for 2 weeks, and now we don't have the money from the sale of our house. People that thought we were crazy really thought we were crazy. Even our faith friends, if you will. And it's like, guys, come back. And then I find out a few weeks later, I have stage 3 breast cancer and need to start chemo immediately. And the movers were literally trying to steal our stuff. And it was almost became comical. So you would think we have missed it. We missed God, however you want to say it. But we knew we had a choice to make. It was very clear for us as a family that we were supposed to go, even though we didn't have all the other answers. And we just had a moment where we had to go, okay, God is either who he says he is or he's not. I didn't find out I had cancer in Oklahoma. I found out here. We would have never have come. And it has been a journey of a lifetime over these last 6 years. And I mean, never thought we'd write a book about a lot of these things, but we found ourselves in our yes going, okay, to Chris's point that he just said, we're going to trust that God has shown us his faithfulness over and over and over again. In Joshua 4, it talks about in the Bible, these memorial stones that they had laid out, these 12 memorial stones. It's kind of like, why are we doing this? It's because it's as soon as things get hard, which life is absolutely hard and unpredictable, we're going to have to remember who God was for us. Okay, that's right. Oh, he came through. Okay, oh no, what about now? Now you have cancer. Now this happens. But this is who God was. And our promise is not that tomorrow is going to be easy. His promise in the Bible, he says, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we held on to that. He's called us here. We do not know how this cancer journey is going to end. We don't know what it's going to look like to get a home. We just said, he said, go. And so it was something that just marked us forever. And there's also, that's big and dramatic. And I know people are like, okay, wow, I'm just trying to homeschool my kids. I just tried to pull them out of school and do this and I'm drowning, right?
It was like a big risk.
That's a big risk. Only because I've done that. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm good at recess. I'm not good at math, Lord help me. So, but there's those moments in life that once we had chosen to stay, the bigger risk for me, which might sound crazy, was a group of 14 women. I wrote about it in the book that invited me to be a part. And I had been so painfully hurt by some relationships. And we came into LA very beat up. And now we've got cancer and we're moving all over the place until our home sells. Everything is scary and unknown. And I kind of grabbed this backpack of self-protection and all of my fear just in case I wanted to abort. And the day I found out I had cancer, just a couple months into moving to LA, I was invited in and I said, I'm going to go. And he said, are you sure? You just found out you had cancer. And I said, I've got to go. I got to take the risk. And I showed up in this group of 14 women who had different beliefs. We were, we all had a similar faith, but all these different things. And God was teaching me out of that risk how to receive. And he developed a sincere love that these women had for me that I'd never experienced quite before. And it was something that risk gave to me in that moment. So there's all these little choices that we make that we don't know how it's going to turn out. But it's like, God's like, but he said he's going to be with me when it's real hard. And it was a promise we keep risking on that every day.
Well, speaking of things that you can't control, which is everything, but the cancer diagnosis that, definitely just an out of the blue.
Yeah.
When we are changing, when we are being vulnerable, there is the risk we take that there will be, what if we talked about the word shame and how we can avoid imposing that on other people or taking it on ourselves, because it seems like that's not a useful thing in our journey.
Yeah, I want to say one thing, and I want
really
you to share another part of this. But I remember with one of our kids, I can't remember if we write about it in the book, but one of our kids, when he was probably 8 or 9, maybe 10, I don't remember.
We did write about it.
But basically, I got a call from a parent and saying, hey, this is what your son did. It was just something that was not appropriate, that he knew better. And I remember my immediate reaction as a pastor, I was like, this looks, because it's all about me, right? I immediately go into my own, oh, shoot, like this doesn't look good on me as a parent. And I'm on my way to pick up my son at school. And I'm literally about to walk up. And look, I'm not like a yeller and I'm not going to like humiliate him. But what I wanted to say was, how could, just like, and right before I get there to pick him up, I in my spirit feel God saying, he already feels so filled with shame. If you put shame on him, you're going to lose his heart. And it just kind of stopped me in my track. And so I walk in, pick him up. I'm holding hands and then we're walking out. I said, hey, buddy, I got a phone call from so-and-so. And as soon as I said that, he started just shaking and crying. And he knew exactly what it was. And what he didn't need from me in that moment, say, how dare you? And even there's phrases we throw around, not we've stopped it, but it's like, shame on you. We say things like this. Literally, we are putting shame on you. And any place of shame is a place of bondage. And that is personally or in any place of relationship. And so what I did with my son is I just sat down and I said, hey, buddy, look at me. I love you. I know who you are. I know that's not who you are. And you could just see kind of the shaking go to this like, oh. And I just know that became this kind of MO for us of going, okay, we've got to make sure in whether it's our kid or in our marriage, we're not taking shots at each other. Most of us are already dealing with our own shame of the regret of what I wish I could have done different or why did I do this? We don't need to put shame on people. Most people have plenty of shame on them already. So I think we're actually called to take shame off us. I think it's what God does for us is he takes the shame and guilt off us. And I would just say in the context of family, one of our values at home is, no, this is going to be a shame-free environment. We're not going to keep bringing stuff up from the past. We're not going to remind you how bad you screwed up when you did. We're going to have consequences. We're going to have hard conversations, but it's going to be a shame-free home.
Yeah, and shame creates such false identities around us. We've actually been talking about that in this current season of our family, just about we have a true identity that God has given us. And we have false identities. Those false identities are formed from our fears. They're formed from the people around us. They're formed from maybe your own parents. So there's times I've seen my kid walk in a false identity, not who they're called to be, because maybe I've put something on them unintentionally, someplace I'm working on. And we've been asking this question, like, what is the main negative emotion that we deal with on a regular basis? Now, majority of the time, people are going to say fear. Found to be that's usually what people say. For me, it's shame. Shame is the immediate negative emotion. And I referenced a couple of things that I'd been through in my life and in our marriage. And there's been a beautiful reconciliation and healing. That tends to be the thing I want to go back to is like, oh, wait a second. And when what that does when that negative emotion is, it's like a check engine light for me. And I'm realizing there's the like, I am statements. I am unworthy. I am this. And we're saying I am whatever it is constantly, even subconsciously, it's kind of going in our thoughts. And we see it with our kids a lot. I can see it in some of my relationships with friends. And I'm like, in close friendships, it's like, wait a second, that's not who you are. And so for us, we're even taking it a step further in our walk with God, where, we know that the Bible says as followers of Jesus that we're children of God, but that's our starting place, but he's also given us a name. Psalm 139, before we were ever formed in our mother's womb, he gave us a name. He said, before you were unformed, even then God said, this is what I've written about you. This is who you are. So we're always trying to go, okay, in these cycles of what we believe about ourselves, what has God said about us? So if my child says, oh, wow, I am Julie's daughter, I am Julie's son, I'm Julie's son. Yes, you are. But who does God say that you are? And so really specific identities about who they are in their current season. And so when we feel shame, we come back to those places. So I don't have time to unpack that, but recognizing that those shame statements, those shame moments are check engine lights where we want to open up the hood and be like, wait a second, let me recheck where this is coming from.
Yeah.
And I'm really intrigued by what you said about we say those things to ourselves, almost like we have been trained to be our own person to hold us down or back from God.
Very much. Yeah. Which is why who we are, like, the beauty of who we're made to be is formed in community. Speaking of isolation and building, fighting for family and belonging, it's like, that's not something we're just hanging out in our room every day trying to figure out. Like, that's a starting place. Like, get with God or get quiet, whatever your routine is. Absolutely. But, and then we tell our churches a lot, like, we have to help one another as we become who we are. We allow ourselves to be messy. We're giving space for vulnerability. We're giving space for us to not be okay. Like in our family unit, especially when walking through cancer, and then my cancer came back, like with a vengeance when COVID hit a second time, there's a lot of emotions around the Bennett home. And we had to learn how to give space to feel angry and upset. And maybe it's not that shame had to do with cancer, but whatever these emotions are, and then we allow them to not overcome us. But we first have to recognize them in our vulnerability. And when we practice it, it's a practice. We said we didn't write this family because we're family experts. Far from it. Sorry, excuse me. We didn't write this book because we're family experts. We are guides and we're learning, right? And through our stories we share, we have learned these strategies by failing, by realizing vulnerability works. And so again, back to the shame, just to kind of land that, is the context of shame is it's done through over and over again, taking the risk, right? That's how our book starts out. We're taking the risk. We're learning to be a mess, but then we're doing it in humility. Humility, ultimately, my favorite part of the definition of humility is seeing yourself rightly, right? And so
I love that part of the book.
Yeah. How do we walk in humility? Is seeing ourselves as we were rightly designed. How do I do that? I do it in the context of family. It's really hard. Yes, it is. It takes forgiveness. And so there's these barriers. It takes boundaries. There's so many things we can talk about, but it's actually all these things on a loop that we're walking through and going, okay, my vulnerability actually is about bringing this to the table so that I can create belonging. Because if I'm made to bring my whole self and I've got all these things, I'm starting with it in my relationship at home. I'm starting with it through, I don't know, just bringing myself to the table so I can work through it. Anyway, we could talk all day about it.
Yeah, well, because we're in good faith and we talk about people's faith journeys, you have shared a lot in your book and a lot here today, very generously, which I really appreciate. I wonder if there's something I should ask you that I don't know to ask you, or if I could say, and here's a question you can say sure or not, is can you put your finger on a reason or one of the reasons why you believe that there is something beyond what we can see, God or the divine?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll answer that last one. It's maybe what Jules said earlier about, when the memorial stones, where we have undeniable proof of God in our life because of so many times we were in an impossible situation. And I remember years ago hearing somebody say, everybody wants to see a miracle, but nobody wants to be in a position to need one. And every time we've stepped out, that's where we've seen God step in. And sometimes that looked like providing, a new relationship into our life. Many times it was unexplainable financial provision that seemed to come from nowhere. I mean, again, I don't have time for this, but our first 3.5 years in LA, because I was taking care of my family while we thought we were going to be creating all these TV shows and shopping them, and we were going to, get the fast pass. It's hard for most people in LA, but we're going to get to the front of the line. And
we've been through hard already.
And 3.5 years with 4 kids in private school, no savings, no retirement, and no income, and never missing a payment, and not raising money, not asking for money, not having parents that could bail us out, literally miracle after miracle after miracle. So I would say this. Our marriage is a testimony that the only way that we have the marriage we have is because God's love and forgiveness in our lives that we extended to one another. And then the undeniable ways that he has cared for my family. And as Julie said, it's hard to explain God's presence, but his presence feels like peace and it feels like love. And in our most chaotic times, there was a strange peace and a strange joy that we knew where the source was. And the Bible says that God's near the brokenhearted. And so I would just say, if anybody's going through a hard time right now, there's no better time than to experience this love.
And in that, he's an invitational God. He doesn't impose our will. He's not making us choose to believe in him. He's not making us do anything. He's not making us stick it out in LA. It is an invitation. So every day God gives us invitations and they never stop coming, but he does not open them for us. He invites us to open up the invitation to see his goodness. And even in our truth telling of our heart and what we believe, I would just say the greatest part of our journey as we have discipled people, if we walked with our own children, as we've walked in community, is that God can handle the hardest places of our lives, what we believe about him and ourselves and others. And as we begin to believe the truth, bring the truth to God and who we are, he always responds with truth. So in our truth, even if it feels ugly and messy, God's always responding with grace and mercy to thank you so much. Thank you for telling me the truth about how you really feel about me. Now I'm going to bring my truth to you. And that's how we transform. That's how we repent. So we give the true confession of where we are, which is telling the truth. We get to walk in repentance, which is him changing the way we think, and then we transform. And that is the heart of fighting for family, is that family is not something to frantically grab a hold on. It's a million choices over and over again that allow us in community to transform. And it just shows us the heart of God more than ever.
The book is called Fighting for Family, The Relentless Pursuit of Building Belonging. Chris and Julie Bennett, thank you so much for speaking with me today in good faith.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
Such
Steve.
an honor.
Appreciate it.
So thankful.